I'm starting with the top of the desk and we're going to make it out of white oak. And the desk that I'm making just happens to match this just about in size, so that should help you visualize. It's going to be 2 feet front to back by 5 feet long. I'm calling it a desk, but you could call it a work table, a craft table. This one's going to be for a sewing machine in my wife's sewing room, but let's just call it a desk and keep it simple because it's pretty much the same thing. I've got 4 boards that I picked up at the lumber yard a few months ago with this project kind of in mind, and this should give me plenty of wood for what I need. These 2 boards are 8 feet long, but this one has got a couple of massive knots here and it's really kind of rotten here at the end, so I'll probably lop it off about there. Bit of bark inclusion here, so this is going to be trimmed down to about 3 inches. And this last board's got a big crack and a bit of a knot situation here, and it also comes in here at the end, so I'm going to have to work around this. So for this great big one, I'm going to first have to cut the end off to get rid of these knots, and then I'm going to have to split it roughly down the middle because I only have a 6-inch jointer and there is a bit of a cup here, so splitting it down the middle will mean I'll be wasting less wood when I flatten it. These boards are about 1 1/8 inches thick, which is good because they are definitely wiggly. I have to do a lot of jointing and planing to get these to straighten out. So I'm trying to save wood also. So on this piece, I'm going to first rip it and then cross cut it so we can have as much length preserved as possible on the offcut. And so with just the first round of breaking things down, I can lay them out on the table and suddenly I don't have that much extra. I've got, because these boards are not tight and they're not quite covering it, so I'm going to need every little bit of this wood, it looks like. Next is jointing. Okay, that took a while, and I'm quite glad that I cut the 12-inch board into thirds instead of in half, because I think these narrower 4-inch boards jointed flat a lot quicker than they would have if I'd let them at 6 inches. But anyways, now I'm going to start bringing them down to thickness with my planer, and I'm probably going to do that in 2 sessions because I want to plane them just a little bit and then I'll let them rest overnight, and then I'll probably do another planing session either tomorrow or the next day. So it's now 2 days later, the boards have been resting, and luckily they did not do any major twisting, so now it's time for a little bit more jointing, a little bit more planing, and then we can get on with gluing them back together. I planed them down to 13/16, just a hair over 3/4, and after that it's over to the table saw where I rip them parallel to see just how much wood I actually have left. That is barely enough. I mean, it looks like I got tons because if you line it across the end, you see I'm overhanging, but I still need to cut a strip to put vertically on the front. So I think I have enough, but barely. So I've got the boards laid out and I've been arranging them, and partly that's for color and partly that's for grain, trying to figure out what goes well together. This one piece, I'm not real happy with this really wild grain, but I need to use the board, but it belongs here because it's actually part of this piece. The grain matches, so I think it'll look best if I put those two together. I also need to decide which board am I going to cut a piece off of to make the front lip. And at first I was looking at this board because it's got some nice straight grain here, so the top would look good, the inside would look good. However, this board is a fair bit lighter in color. I'm thinking that this board will look noticeably pale if I glue it along the front like this, so I'm not sure I want to do that. This was also the board that had that bark inclusion, and I was planning to cut it off, but I didn't think I could spare the wood. However, now that I've got it arranged and I'm doing the math, I think I can take 3/4 of an inch off the edge of this and I will still have enough wood. So I'm going to probably do that, but this is going to be on the bottom so nobody will see it. From this side it looks okay. What I think I've settled on is this piece. This has some nice straight grain here. I think it gets a little pale there, so I was thinking I would cut 1 3/4 inches here. To me, taking the time to lay out the grain and the color and all that is a really important part of custom woodworking, and I know it doesn't make the most exciting video, but I want to at least mention that I'm spending that time doing that in my video so you can put it in your head and think about it. One other little thing I'm going to talk about here for a moment is think about what your project is for. So if this was a tabletop, the whole thing is going to be visible all the time. So you want the whole thing to look good. This is going to be a desk. And when you think about what a desk is for, let's say I was making a computer desk. I'm going to have my keyboard here. I'm going to have one or two monitors. I might have a tower. I might have a mouse pad. Might have a book open. A lot of your desk is covered frequently. In this case, it's going to be a sewing desk. So I'll have a sewing machine here, or maybe a serger here. There might be, an instruction book laid open. There might be some tools in the back. So again, a large part of it is going to be covered all the time. So I'm really focused on the front 6 to 10 inches. That's the part that I really want to look nice, because that's what you're going to see the most of. Obviously, I want the whole thing to look good, and I'm going to do my best to make it do that, but priorities. The wood that you might think is a little less presentable, I'm going to put on the back. It might still be okay, but maybe not premium. But again, this is a little design digression, something to think about. So with that decision made, I'm going to cut 1 3/4 inches off of this board to be the front lip of the desk. And after all that, I changed my mind again because the cutting of the wood revealed some differences in color and grain. So I cut this piece to be the front lip, but then when I turned it, it's like, oh, this is actually fairly light. I like the nice straight grain, but it is a different color. So then this is the piece across the back that was too light. That's where I had that bark inclusion that I cut off. So I'm now thinking that if I put this along the front, slide this here, the dark grain of these boards I think blends into this board, but then it starts to go pale. And then this piece across the front I think blends in really nice. So I think we'll have this splash of paler color across the front. Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to go for. This is one of those situations where those people who mill their own lumber have the advantage because they can be sure their boards are coming out of the same tree, so they should have the same type of grain and coloration and all that. I went to a lumber mill, sure, but I mean, I'm picking boards off a stack in a bit of a dark barn and doing my best. And yeah, I end up with a couple of boards that just happen to be paler grain than the rest, and that's the fun of woodworking. Trees are different. Even within a species, you're going to get different colorations. Now, as you can see, my boards are not in perfect alignment, so I will be using dowels to align the boards as I glue up the panel. And so I need to cut a straight end on all my boards because my dowel jig aligns from one end and moves along. And then with them back laid out, I want to make sure that I don't mess up this layout. I'll be using my Dowel Max jig to drill alignment holes in the edge of the board before the glue up. And to make sure I don't mess up, I drew a line at the 5-foot mark or the 60-inch mark to make sure I don't put a dowel there because this is where I'll be cutting later. This is a big piece, so I think I'm going to do 3 at a time first, but then I can still probably bring them all together. So here we go. I usually put glue in the dowel holes, but there really is no reason for that because these are used for alignment, not for strength, so I am skipping that this time in the interest of speeding things up and making it simpler. And the first set went very quickly and everything is lining up nice. On to the next set. And now one last set. Drilling all those dowel holes was pretty time consuming, but this is where there's a payoff because everything just lines up perfectly. I've got a good glue line. I just need to put on the rest of the clamps and we are done for a while. On this channel we do full disclosure, so I'm going to show you a few spots where I think I messed up a little bit. Right here on this seam I'm not getting any glue squeeze out. I've tried cranking the clamp as much as I can, and there's another spot farther along where I also am not seeing any glue squeeze out. So is that going to compromise the strength of the table? No, I doubt it. It's just there's a spot there where you might be able to see the seam because it's not fully tight. Fortunately, this is on the back of the desk and probably won't be visible, but as we progress through it, I'll see if I have to do any filling there or something. So with the tabletop glued up, my next step is going to be to attach that front lip, and I'm also going to use dowels for alignment. Take the same jig and I add in a spacer on the one side so that it will fit across the face, because I'm putting dowels into the face. And then again, you have to adjust the depth collar on the drill bit so that you're not drilling all the way through. And again, just going to put dowels all the way along this piece, and then the same along the front of the table. There I will have to drill the hole deeper so the dowels go deeper into that part. Put the dowels in this part. It's easier to put glue on a horizontal surface, but I find it easier to clamp when this is horizontal. So I forgot to turn the camera on for this, but I decided this little gap was a bit too much here, so I had these thin little shavings of white oak, and I just dabbed a little glue and I put them in, and now I'm going to, let's just fold it over to break it clean, and then I will come along with a chisel, and that practically disappears. Now aside from that one crack, I do have a few knots that I need to fill with epoxy, but first I'm going to wrestle this onto the table saw and I'm going to trim it to the final length of 60 inches. And yeah, this would be a good time to have a track saw, which I don't. So now we got to deal with these little knots. They're not big, but there is a little crack in most of them. I need to fill that in. I'm going to use some West System epoxy for that. Not much. And just a few drops of ebony stain. I want to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. So I use a heat gun to heat up the wood, because then the epoxy will run in easier. You don't want to heat up the epoxy itself because that'll kick off the reaction, but if you heat up the wood, then the epoxy will just soak in easier, deeper. This one crack goes all the way through, so I expect I might need to fill it a few times. I'll keep watching it for a bit, but that's basically it for 24 hours until this is good and solid dry, and I'll be on to sanding it. If you have one, a scraper will take these down quickly. and save your sander from gumming up. And now it's totally flat and we can use the sander after this. And now it's time for everybody's favorite chore. With the top pretty much complete, it's time to shift gears and focus on the base. I want the legs to be set towards the back so it cantilevers out so there's lots of leg room in front. I'm going to build the base out of 2x10s. I think the pale spruce will provide a nice contrast to the darker white oak top. And of course, it's easy to work with and it's inexpensive. But if you are going to work with construction lumber, I strongly urge you to get 2x10s or 2x12s, even though I'm going to be cutting this down to small pieces. I've got a video that goes into detail about buying construction lumber for furniture. In summary, you're more likely to get nice clean boards and you can work around the knots and you're going to get less junky wood by buying 2x10s and bigger. I'm going to break down the 2x10s into the parts that I need, cutting them roughly oversized on the table saw. And I'm also going to give them just a really light pass through the planer, just take off some of the milling marks and square them up a bit. And then back to the table saw and I'm going to bring them down to their final dimensions. I don't have a big miter saw station, so I need to do my cross cuts to length on the table saw. And these pieces are big enough that I can't really use a stop block, so I will use a square to line up the ends, and then I will clamp them into place on my crosscut sled, and then they will all be cut to the exact same length. It might be a hair more or a hair under my measured length, but they'll all be the same, which is the important thing. So I've roughly laid out one of the two leg assemblies here on my table saw. And the next thing that I probably should be working on is joining these together. Got the upper and the lower and the two uprights, but I'm actually going to stop now because I need to talk about how the two leg assemblies are connected together. So you can see from the plans that I have this stretcher that goes across the bottom, but what is not so easy to see in this one is that I also have this stretcher going across the top, and this stretcher is fitting between these uprights. Now I was debating between knockdown joinery and other kinds of joinery, and I'm quite sure you could just pop some 4-inch screws into the end of it and it would probably be fine. Shocking as that may seem to other people, I have upstairs a bunk bed from Crate and Barrel, or one of those things that we've had for like 15 years, and it's held together with lag bolts into end grain, and it's been solid for that long. So yeah, I know it's not anyways, I'm getting off topic because I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use some dowels, and because of the jig that I have, I want to drill the dowel holes into the uprights now before I start working on any further joinery, because it's just easier to get at it now. I'm going to be making 1/2-inch dowel holes using the 1/2-inch jig option from Dowel Max. The more common 3/8-inch dowels, I'm sure, would work fine. I've used these like on a bed that I've made before, but there's more than one way to do it. And I want a few more dowel holes, so I will use the alignment pin, lock it into the last dowel hole, and now I can drill 2 more. There we go. Okay, now I'm ready to work on the joinery for the leg structures, and that's all going to be half lap joints. Half laps at the ends of the vertical parts, and then matching half laps notched into the legs. And after a lot of fiddling, I got the blade set up in my table saw to take the right depth cut, and I did that by cutting 2 pieces and putting them together so that they match. So I know I'm going to cut exactly halfway through the one piece. And this is the point where the battery died in my microphone, and I didn't notice it, but luckily it was one of the last cutting operations of the evening, and what I'm doing here is I'm just nibbling away at the dado with my saw by taking repeated cuts, and it doesn't take that long. I'm using a 3/8 wide flat top box joint cutting blade here just because it gives a really nice finish. The top and the bottom parts of the leg assemblies have 2 half laps, so it's just the same process. It just required a little bit of careful measuring and the use of stop blocks, but it still is just hogging out the material on the table saw. So let's take the upper and the lower leg, and I got the one upright, and then the next upright which has the holes in it. And that is perfect. And then the other leg assembly is a mirror image, one for each side. I've got everything carefully laying out for the glue up. Lots of long grain to long grain. This should be a super strong joint. The beauty of these joints is that they kind of force it into alignment just for fun. Here, check the corner, and it's 35 3/4 and 35 3/4, so that is nicely square. Shouldn't even need much clamping then. And then the same with the other one. And while the two leg assemblies are clamped up and drying, I took the opportunity to cut the stretchers down to final width and length. Then I could take these spacers out of my doweling jig and shrink it back down. And now it will fit on the end of the stretcher, and I can drill those holes. Which should line up perfectly with the 5 already in the leg assembly. So the leg assemblies go under the table, something like this. You know, it's upside down right now, and then the stretchers will go here. But the first thing I want to do is I want to cut some angles here so they look a little bit less square and boxy. Something like this. These little squares that go around corners are handy sometimes for when you need to do all this markup. I've loaded up my router table with this rather large roundover bit because I want a pretty aggressive roundover on the top and bottom of the leg assemblies to just soften them up. Needs some sanding, but I think that turned out pretty nice. I'm gonna now just take a small 1/4 inch roundover and go over the edges of this too. It's good to do a dry fit just to make sure everything fits together and that you can practice things, and that's when you discover that you don't actually have a long enough clamp. You'd think I know by now, but every time again I'm always surprised because anyways, just put 2 clamps together and that should do the trick. Luckily, because things are cantilevered out like that, if things are not absolutely perfectly 90 degrees, it doesn't matter. It'll be fine. It's just you want to make sure this part is square and true. I didn't film it, but these holes, which were blocked by the half flap, I did drill them all the way so you can get your dowel properly in. Also, unlike the dowels when I was using for alignment for the tabletop, these dowels are providing, well, they're acting like mortise and tenon, so I need to glue these in. They're not for alignment, these are actually for structure. And now comes the stressful part. Let's get it together. I'm just putting glue inside the holes and wiping it around so it's well coated. Of course, now the other side, this is a little trickier because I can't really stand the piece up like I'd want to. I suppose I could try putting it on the floor, but there we go. Always tricky with big projects in this little shop. Just Trying to get the camera far enough away so you can see what's going on. Oh yeah. Oh, it's running. Oh. Oh. There. Got it. Got it. That is tightening up, but not quite here. Get up. Check for square. Nope. This top needs to come in. I'm not sure what the camera can pick up because I can't pay attention to the camera right now. Well, I'm very glad I did a dry fit, but apparently that wasn't quite enough because I really couldn't close up this joint. I needed to run and get my son to help hold the clamp up so that I could do this clamping to clamping thing. So yeah, I got 2 clamps here, 2 clamps here, 2 clamps here, 2 clamps here just to try to get the length that I needed. But everything is, let me swing it around. Going like this, everything is plumb. And going like this, everything is square in there. So, whew. So now the bottom structure is complete and the top structure is complete. The next thing I'm going to be working on is finishing, but I've noticed that the video is already over 25 minutes long, and so I think for this video I'm going to basically skip over the finishing. I'm going to water pop the top, and then I'll be using my standard polyurethane that I really like on it. And the base, I'm just going to go straight to the polyurethane. Let me show you one tiny little change that I made. My wife and I put the base and the top together and it just seemed a little bit short to us, and I ran back up to her craft room and I compared this to the table that we're matching the height on, and sure enough, I think I'm about a 1/4 inch down, so I added these little 1/4 inch pads at the bottom of each foot. I'll be using these rubber feet that I have. They're also a 1/4 inch thick. The other alternative that I thought of doing would be adjustable feet, but the table turned out nice and flat, so I don't think I need adjustable feet, so I'm going to use these because I have them. But so yeah, this will be adding another 1/4 inch to height, so I'll be adding about a 1/2 inch in total. If you really want to adjust the height, like if you were making a table like this, these upright stretchers are where you'd want to do that. You know, you'd want to design it a little bit taller in there and make those longer. So anyways, on to finishing. I don't have a spritz bottle, so I'm just going to use a damp rag for water popping. The idea is to raise the grain and then you will sand it down again. It is neat how water gives you an idea about what it's going to look like with some finish on it. So it's a couple of days later and I've got 3 coats of finish on the top and it's looking gorgeous. And the base also has 3 coats, so it's time to put them together. So I'm going to take the top and I'm going to flip it upside down on a nice padded surface. Then the base will get put on top of that for attaching it together. There's a 3-inch overhang on either side. I'll be using these table hold down clips. Some people call them Z clips or Z clips. So for each one I will need a slot to attach to the table, and yeah, I only have 4. I need to buy some more. I'll be using my biscuit cutter to cut the slots. It does a great job of that. You do not want to drill right through your nice new tabletop, so I'm using a piece of tape to guide my drilling depth. And I do have more clips on order from Lee Valley, but these 4 should be good enough to start with. And I'm also adding rubber feet to the bottom. And here at last it is all together and standing on its own 2 legs. As I planned, the spruce base has got a nice pale color to contrast the warm honey brown of the top. And as I spoke about earlier, you can see how the green blends together, but then it goes to a bit light, but it's almost impossible to see that there's 2 different boards here and here. The color goes nicely together and a pattern across the top. There are a few little knots that have been filled with epoxy and just sort of give it a little character to the top. These are the plans that I used to make this. If you're interested in making yourself a table something like this, these plans are available. There's a link down below to my website. Okay guys, that's it for this one. As always, thanks for stopping by and we'll see you on the next one.